Welcome to this presentation. Have you ever wondered what it would be like walking the streets of Albury when the town had a population of only a few thousand? Tune in as I take you on a virtual tour of Albury as it was in the late 19th century. We are looking at two images, both taken from Western Hill, which we now know as Monument Hill. The top panorama is dated 1879. The second is undated, but by examining the buildings we can date it as about 1887. Albury's population at the 1881 census was 5,715. To get our bearings, the red bars show the position of Dean Street. Orange is Thurgoona Street. Blue is Wodonga Place, and green is Smollett Street. As we view each slide in this presentation, the yellow box will indicate the area of the panoramic image we are zooming in on. This is one of the few slides in this presentation that feature people. This chap has seen the photographer head up the hill with his tripod and camera and is determined to photobomb the image. From the direction of shadows, this is an afternoon shot, and the kids may be arriving home from school on their horses. In this photo, we recognise the bend in the river that is still there today at the back of the Albury Swim Centre. This is the Hovell tree, marked by William Hovell in November 1824. The first steamer to arrive in Albury was the paddle steamer Albury, docking on October 2, 1855, to great celebrations, heralding a new but short-lived era for Albury. The Melbourne Argus reported, "The Murray River Navigation Company's steamer Albury, with Captain Johnson, arrived at Albury on the 2nd instant, to the great delight of the inhabitants of that thriving district. Great credit is due to Captain Johnson for bringing his steamer up in safety. The Albury towed up the barge Wacool, which will remain in Albury. Numbers of the inhabitants flocked on board the steamer, so appropriately named after their township, before she took her departure on her downward journey on the 6th instant. The wharf was completed in May 1871, with the crane added in November of the same year. But once rail had reached Echuca from Melbourne in 1864, then Wodonga from Melbourne in 1873, and Albury from Sydney in 1881, the river trade was doomed. In May 1878, the Sydney Mail and New South Wales Advertiser reported that, since the opening of the railway, few steamers come above Howlong, and the Albury wharf, useless and deserted, is quietly rotting away. In 1896, the wharf was demolished. These two images were taken at the western end of Hume Street, where it meets the Murray River. It was the actual crossing place, and one of the key reasons that a town developed here. When the river was low, it could be crossed here. Cattle, horses and sheep were shepherded across, and before the town had a reticulated water supply, Albury's water carriers would back in their horse-drawn carts with large wooden barrels to fill them up. This well-worn spot is a reminder of one of the key reasons why the town of Albury was established here in the first place. The green bar in this photo marks the position of Smollett Street. In 1866, James Liddell built a new brewery at the southern end of Thurgoona Street, overlooking the cricket ground. Brewing commenced in December of that year. In 1877, David Scott Watson took over the business, and in about 1890 he relocated the brewery to a position close to the corner of Dean and Thurgoona Streets. Watson was twice Mayor of Albury. This is the first caretaker's house at the Albury Botanic Gardens and the pavilion at the Albury Cricket Ground. Here we have a closer look at the Albury Cricket Ground. In September 1868, the Border Post reported that the Borough Council has granted permission for use of the land, fenced, a well sunk, a pump installed, and the first turf laid for pitching the wickets. In March of 1872, the pavilion opened, and there were repairs and additions in November of 1879. The bottom image is from the later panorama. Compare the growth of trees in the two images along Wodonga Place on the far side of the ground. Here we see the Albury football team in 1884, in front of the pavilion at the northern end of the Albury Cricket Ground. That's an interesting assortment of uniforms. These two images show development over a few years at the Albury Botanic Gardens. The blue bars indicate Wodonga Place. In 1864, the colonial government announced that 50 acres of land was to be set aside for gardens, a hospital and a sports ground. In 1877, the gardens opened, the occasion marked by the planting of its first tree, an English elm, by then Mayor Alderman William Jones. In 2021, that tree still survives at the northeast corner of the gardens. The early plan included a layout in the rough shape of a Union Jack, and this is just visible in the later image. We are now looking at the back of a house known as Bungamba Terrace. The older image is on the left. In the newer image at right, the much admired row of elm trees in the Botanic Gardens can be more clearly seen in an early stage of their growth. Reminiscing in the Albury Banner on January 10, 1908, about his time as a youngster in the 1860s, a writer who used the pen name The Little Rascal recalled, "Where the beautifully kept Botanic Gardens now stand, there was a swamp, a morass, and a thick scrub, through which a small track led to a large house on the hill. The house was called Bungamba Terrace, once the residence of Mr. Police Magistrate Atkins. In the middle 60s, it was a board and residence establishment kept by Mrs. Turnbull. The Bungamba Creek meandered at the bottom of the garden, a slimy, sluggish stream, and many's the bag of crawfish we little rascals caught in the creek, which at one time was crossed by an old rustic bridge in the shape of a big gum tree, which had very obligingly fallen across the stream." The Atkins referred to in this passage was Hayward St Ledger Atkins. In March 1853, Atkins was appointed as Albury's first police magistrate on a salary of £350 a year. Atkins disappeared from Albury in mysterious circumstances in 1860. Captain Marcus Freeman Brownrigg was Albury's second police magistrate and later occupied Bungamba Terrace. Brownrigg was ex-Royal Navy. He had the distinction of hearing of the very first case at the New Albury Courthouse in August 1860, the case of a well-known female charged with drunkenness. One of his sons, Marcus Blake Brownrigg, became a Church of England minister, and in 1863 he became rector at St Matthew's Church, Albury. Captain Brownrigg remained as police magistrate until 1880. He was said to administer justice with quarter-deck manors. This is the position of the first Albury showgrounds. Thurgoona Street is in orange, Dean Street in red. Robert Brown called a meeting in January 1857 at the Criterion Hotel in Hume Street that resulted in the formation of the Albury and Murray River Agricultural and Horticultural Society. The following year, 3 acres were granted to the Show Society on the western side of what is now Thurgoona Street. The yards were completed at a cost of £475. The first show was held at the site in March 1860. Exhibitors competed for gold, silver and bronze medals. But the Border Post complained that in February 1861 the medals were not forthcoming, though there was £144 in credit in the bank. This site was quickly found to be unsuitable as a showground, with runoff from Western Hill creating a quagmire after rain, so the Show Society started to look for a new site. The last show was held here in 1878. A 5-acre site on the north-east corner of Guinea and Young Streets became available, and the first stock show was held at the new showgrounds in 1879. Here we have the Albury Jail, built in 1861. It was south of the hospital on the western side of Thurgoona Street. The original jail had 12 cells over 2 floors. From 1879 to 1881, the jail was extended with the addition of 16 cells, 4 of them for women. Each cell was 10 foot by 10 foot, or about 3 metres by 3 metres. Also added were a jailer's house, a workshop, a hospital ward, a kitchen and a surgery. A new brick perimeter wall 16 feet high, or almost 5 metres, was also added. Watchtowers were installed at 2 corners of the jail. The 1879 design included 1 cell designated for solitary confinement and another was the condemned cell. There was only ever 1 execution at the jail. On June 1, 1881, Henry Wilkinson, aged 46, was hanged for murdering a woman and her father in a wine shanty on the Gindra Gap. The last prisoners in the jail were transferred in 1943 to Goulburn Jail. Later the jail became the detention barracks for the 17th Australian Army. In January 1946, 51 soldiers were detained in the jail. In 1947, the jail closed and the site transferred to the New South Wales Housing Commission. The jail was demolished and its bricks were used in construction of public housing on the site. The first hospital was opened in 1861, north of the jail, on the corner of Thurgoona Street and what was known then as the Howlong Road. We now know it as Pemberton Street. The front door of the hospital looked almost directly down Stanley Street. The hospital originally had 3 wards. After a new hospital in Wodonga Place opened in 1918, the old hospital became the home of Albury High School from 1920 until the school moved to their new Kiewa Street site in 1927. This is a photo of the school on the first day of lessons, February 2, 1920. The original photo is sharp enough that faces can be clearly identified. The old hospital building was demolished in 1935 and public housing built on the site. To get our bearings in this image, the red bar is Kiewa Street, blue is Swift Street, green is Stanley Street. There's a lot to be seen in this image, and we'll start with Felon Sellers. The Felon Sellers opened for James Fallon in 1869. The photo below shows the above ground building in the 1960s. The cellars were said to be an attraction of Albury that all visitors must see. An article in the Australian Town and Country Journal in 1872 told readers, "The cellars are on granite foundations with an upper story of brick and covered by a galvanised iron roof. The upper floor is used as a storeroom for casks, etc., and at one end is a suite of offices. To give an idea of the cellars, one would have to imagine a building, the roofs of which were supported by huge pillars and crossed pieces of red gum, with all around tiers of casks. There were rows of casks, each capable of holding a man with a wife and 6 children. These oval casks hold about 1,500 gallons of wine each, and the man Mr. Fallon employs bills about 1 a week." Here we have an artist's impression of the cellars and Albury's thriving wine industry of the 19th century, published in the Illustrated Sydney News and New South Wales Agriculturalist and Grazier on June 12, 1880. And at right is a photo inside Felon Sellers, not long before demolition. The cellars were demolished in 2007 to make way for Quest Apartments. The red gum pillars and ceiling supports were rescued after demolition, and some have been used as seating around Albury. This one photographed adjacent to the footpath at the Albury Botanic Gardens. The foundation stone of the first Wesleyan Church on the southwest corner of Swift and Olive Streets was laid in 1865. The more familiar larger church opened in 1875. The building is now part of the Albury Police Precinct. The Congregational or Independent Church opened on the north side of Swift Street in 1875. The church was purchased by the Lutheran congregation in 1928. The Temperance Hall was on the northwest corner of Stanley and Keywash Streets. It opened in 1885 and was sold in 1890 to become the Federal Theatre. The group photo was taken close to the turn of the 20th century, and the building was demolished in 1966. We now move back towards the south. The Oddfellows Hall opened in this Keywash Street building in 1874. In 2021, the building is the home of Bellbridge Hague Solicitors. St Matthew's Church of England. The original church was built from 1857 to 1859 to the design of well-known colonial architect Edmund Blackett of Sydney. He also designed the original buildings of Sydney University and St Saviour's Cathedral in Goulburn. The foundation stone of a larger St Matthew's Church was laid by Thomas Mate in March 1874. The church opened in January of 1876. The parsonage had opened several years earlier in 1869. Just visible in the background is the Advance Australia Hotel, built by James Layton and opening in 1857. James Soden took over the licence in 1894, purchasing the hotel in February 1899. Soden remained the licensee for almost 50 years. Albury's first post office opened in 1861. The structure we are now familiar with was built in 1879 by local builder Alexander Frew around the earlier structure. It contained private accommodation for the postmaster and stables at the north end. The first floor had 6 rooms with a large dining room and clock tower. The clock was supplied and installed by Mr. Angelo Tornaghi and first struck in November 1879. In 2011, the building was placed on the Commonwealth Heritage List. It was described as an imposing country post office having good civic architecture qualities, which makes a suitable entrance to the other civic buildings in Dean Street in terms of style, scale and height. This is what the original post office looked like. The time ball first operated on July 20, 1861. Locals were able to set their clocks as the ball fell. Every day it was hoisted at 5 minutes before 1 p.m. and fell precisely at that hour. The ball was between 3 and 4 feet in diameter, formed of canvas stretched on a wooden frame and painted in alternate stripes of black and white. The time ball was later removed to the back of the post office. Before moving further west on Dean Street, a quick look at the Albury railway station. The station was opened in February 1882, a grand building that still stands proudly at the top of Smollett Street. It is said that New South Wales colonial authorities wanted a building to outdo anything across the river in Victoria. And just visible is the signal box, still standing in 2021, but badly in need of restoration and repair. The Albury Club Hotel opened on this site in 1875. In 1877, it was described as containing sitting rooms, private dining rooms, bedrooms, billiard room, bar and public dining room, kitchen and bathrooms. The hotel was renovated in 1938 to 1939, made to resemble an old English tavern, and it was renamed the Carlton Hotel. In the photo of the Carlton, the 2 gables of the former hotel can be seen on the left. In about 1970, the Carlton was demolished to make way for the Travelodge Hotel. After several name changes, it is now known as the Atura. William Davison established his saddlery and harness factory in 1874, with Albury growing rapidly as a result of rail arriving in Wodonga from Melbourne in 1873. In October 1919, an advertisement in the Border Morning Mail advised that C. Eustace and W. McCulloch, a saddler sergeant in the AIF in France, and both of whom have been for nearly 20 years in the employ of Mr. W. Davison, had taken over the business. The Fanny Sellers mill was built for James Maclaurin in 1851. He named it Fanny for Fanny Brown, the daughter of Albury's first European settler, Robert Brown, and Ceres after the Roman goddess of corn. Comparing the buildings in the circle with the photo bottom right, we can locate where the mill was on Dean Street. In 1861, ownership of the mill passed to George Day after he and James Maclaurin did a property swap, Maclaurin getting farming land near Germanton, which we now know as Holbrook. George Day disposed of the mill when he entered Parliament. He was connected with the New South Wales State Parliament for 32 years, firstly as Albury's local member and later in the Upper House. Mr. Day was at one time said to have owned the whole of the south side of Dean Street from the Albury Hotel to Townsend Street. In 1874, the Fanny Sellers mill passed to the Hayes brothers. Then in 1882, the eastern portion of the building was demolished for Temple Court. In 1887, the Hayes brothers closed Fallon Sellers and rebuilt on the western side of Townsend Street. The remaining Fallon Sellers building was still intact in 1911 behind the Beehive building. That part of the Fallon Sellers mill that fronted Dean Street has now gone, and here, circled in yellow, we can see the remaining part of the mill. The Beehive building on the southeast corner of Dean and Townsend Streets was built in 1889 for Charles L. Griffith, a stock and station agent. Charles was born at St Crooks in the Virgin Islands. There have been a broad range of tenants in the building, including a saddler, a shoe shop, a chemist, a tailor, a sports store. Further west on Dean Street is the Hume flour mill. John Burroughs migrated from Cheshire, England in 1855, and after trying his luck at the Bendigo goldfields, he resumed his former occupation as a flour miller in Deloraine, Tasmania. In 1860, he established a flour mill at Wangaratta, followed by mills at Barnawatta, Albury, Beechworth and Chiltern. Percy Burroughs was born in 1879 at Barnawatta. He was the youngest son of John. He took over management of the flour mill in 1908 and was very involved in local affairs. As mayor in 1916 to 1917, he was very influential in bringing electricity to Albury, and his wife, the Lady Mayoress, formally switched on Albury's electricity in 1916. Percy Burroughs was a foundation member of the Albury and District Historical Society. In 1909 to 1910, the Dean Street mill was demolished as it was considered too far from the railway, and the bricks were used again in building the new mill in Young Street. The silos there were built in 1912 and were the first concrete silos to be built in New South Wales. We will finish the tour in Smollett Street, starting with a look at the Exchange Hotel and Stables. The original hotel here was the Squatters' Hotel of William Comley. He was accidentally killed in 1858. In 1859, the hotel was taken over by William Brickell and Adam Kidd. They had arrived in Australia from America in 1852. Hoping to find gold and strike it rich, they headed straight for Yakandanda. By the end of the decade, they were successful businessmen in Albury. Brickell and Kidd added a second story to Comley's original hotel and renamed it the Exchange Hotel, and they added a theatre, the only one in Albury at the time. As the postcard image implies, the hotel was an important stopping place for coaching companies such as Cobb & Co and Crawford's. Amongst many other money-making ventures, Brickell and Kidd won the contract to build Albury's first Union Bridge for £7,500. The bridge opened in 1861. Both Brickell and Kidd returned to America in 1862, but just before leaving from Melbourne, William married a girl from Goulburn, Mary Bulmer. William and Mary Brickell then became pioneers in Florida and are now famously recognised as the founders of Miami, founded using money they made in Albury. Back now to Albury. In 1884, the hotel changed hands and was converted to a general store by Messrs Edmondson, Parker and Company, and later owned by John E. Roberts. After demolition of the former hotel building, Farmers and Graziers wool stores opened on the site in August 1923. The building we see today is largely a redesign by local architect Lewis Harrison in 1933. All that is left now of the Exchange Hotel is the stables in Smollett Street, now a block of residential units. Just visible in the background is St Bridget's Convent building. It was formally opened in February 1870. At a height of over 21 metres, it was Albury's first three-storey building and Albury's tallest building until the magnificent railway station was opened in 1882 to a height of about 24 metres. At the bottom of the screen is an image of Thomas Mate's first retail store on the southwest corner of Hume and Townsend Streets, opened in 1850. In Albury's early days, Townsend Street was Albury's business centre, its CBD. Businesses started moving north to Dean Street once it became clear that flooding would be a recurring problem in South Albury. The photo we are looking at now is from 1896. This building was opened in 1884, replacing the much smaller single-storey building. Thomas Hodges Mate was born in County Kent, England in 1810. He arrived in Australia in 1833, and it was not long before he had established pastoral and business interests in southern New South Wales. After establishing in Albury in 1850, the discovery of gold in Victoria brought huge opportunities for his business, being so close to the crossing place of the Murray. In 1899, Mates expanded to its iconic department store on the corner of Dean and Kiewa Streets. Mates' store would become the largest store of its kind in the Riverina. Mates' 1884 Townsend Street store is still standing in 2021, a reminder of what was the business end of town in 19th century Albury. These are Thomas Mate's stables. In 1845, this was the site of Albury's first steam-powered flour mill, built by Richard Heaver. Heaver advertised the business for sale in the Sydney Morning Herald of May 1854. Sometime later, Thomas Mate established his stables on the site. In 1960, Mates Limited sold the property to the Total Oil Company, and in 2021, the site is home to Bob Jane's Tyre Service. This magnificent home, Carlton, was built by Thomas Mate on what was Allotment 1, Section 1 of the Albury Township. The first survey peg for the original Albury Township was planted here by New South Wales colonial surveyor Thomas Townsend in late 1838. This is a copy of Townsend's map dated January 12, 1839. The arrow indicates Lot 1, Section 1. Townsend's original plan included Hume, Hovell, Ebden and Uragong streets running east-west, and what was originally named Wodonga Place, then Townsend Street and Kiewa Street running north-south. On December 24, 1839, Lot 1, Section 1 was sold to Daniel McLean for £8, 13 shillings and 4 pence, as recorded in the New South Wales Government Gazette. McLean sold the land to Mr. W.N.M. Edmondson in May 1871 for £69, and Edmondson sold it on in November of that same year to Thomas Mate for the same amount. In 1884, Thomas built Carlton on the site. It became the family home of Mate's daughter Sophia and his son-in-law and manager of Mate's retail business, George Arthur Thompson. It is believed that the house was so named because of Mr. Thompson's Welsh heritage, Carlton being a place name that appears in Arthurian legends. Thompson sold the home in June 1923 to Dr. Rudolf Schlink. Dr. Schlink sold the house to Joseph Breen in April 1937 and it became a guest house. It was probably while in the hands of the Breens that the name was changed to Ranelagh. There were other changes of ownership before Ranelagh was sold in July 1958 and demolished. The site became home to Dunlop Tyre Service in 1958, followed by Beaurepairs Tyre Service, and in 2021 it is the site of Alessi Motors. That's the end of the tour. I hope you leave a little bit better informed about the rich heritage of beautiful Albury.